The marble columns of the Senate chamber had witnessed countless debates over the years, but what happened today left everyone in the room with a renewed sense of hope for American democracy. Senator Ted Cruz, known for his sharp legal mind and conservative principles, sat listening attentively as Representative Jasmine Crockett addressed the Joint Committee meeting on education reform. Crockett had just finished a thoughtful presentation that wove together compelling statistics, personal stories from her constituents, and an unexpected touch of self-deprecating humor that lightened the otherwise serious atmosphere. "My mother always told me," she had concluded with a warm smile, "that the best teachers are those who help us see old problems through new eyes and then give us the courage to do something about them." What happened next surprised everyone. Ted Cruz, rather than beginning his remarks with his prepared questions, set his notes aside, removed his glasses, and with genuine appreciation in his voice said something that would soon resonate with millions of Americans. "Representative Crockett, before addressing the policy details, I want to acknowledge something important. Though we often find ourselves on opposite sides of many issues, your blend of wisdom, heartfelt conviction, and that remarkable ability to use humor to illuminate complex problems rather than divide us. That's exactly what these chambers need more of. Thank you for that example." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't political theater. It was a genuine human moment of respect that transcended partisan lines. And it was about to touch the hearts of millions of Americans yearning for evidence that our shared humanity still matters more than our political divisions. Before we continue with this remarkable story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more content that celebrates these moments when our leaders rise above division and remind us of our shared values and common humanity. To understand why this moment between Senator Cruz and Representative Crockett resonated so deeply with the American public, we need to appreciate the journeys that brought these two accomplished individuals to that hearing room. Ted Cruz, now 54, had established himself as one of the Senate's intellectual heavyweights. With degrees from Princeton and Harvard Law School, where he had been an editor of the Law Review, Cruz had built his career on a foundation of constitutional scholarship and principled conservative advocacy. First elected to the Senate in 2012, he had become known for his articulate defense of limited government, traditional values, and a textualist approach to the Constitution. What many people didn't see behind Cruz's public persona was his genuine appreciation for substantive debate and intellectual exchange. Former law clerks and colleagues often spoke of his willingness to engage deeply with opposing viewpoints, not to score points, but to sharpen understanding. A former Democratic Senate staffer once remarked, "Away from the cameras, Senator Cruz asks thoughtful questions and genuinely listens to the answers, even when he ultimately disagrees with your conclusion." Cruz had arrived at the Joint Committee meeting that day prepared to advocate for educational approaches emphasizing parental choice, traditional curriculum, and local control, positions consistent with his conservative philosophy. He had expected the usual partisan divide that characterized most policy discussions in Washington. Representative Jasmine Crockett brought a different perspective to the hearing room. At 43, the freshman congresswoman had risen from a background as a civil rights attorney with deep roots in her community. Before entering politics, she had represented clients from underserved areas and had witnessed firsthand the transformative power of education in breaking cycles of poverty and creating opportunity. Crockett had quickly distinguished herself in Congress not just for her progressive policy positions, but for her communication style. Where many representatives relied on talking points and partisan framing, she often incorporated personal stories, evidence-based analysis, and an occasional touch of humor that made complex issues more accessible to everyday Americans. What made Crockett especially effective was her authenticity. Even those who disagreed with her policies acknowledged her genuine concern for her constituents and her willingness to engage respectfully with different viewpoints. A Republican colleague had once noted, "She advocates forcefully for what she believes, but she never questions your motives or your character just because you see things differently." The Joint Committee meeting on education reform had brought them together at a time when America's schools faced unprecedented challenges. From pandemic learning loss to debates about curriculum and classroom resources, education had become yet another battleground. in America's increasingly divided political landscape. We'd love to hear in the comments section about moments when you've witnessed unexpected respect or understanding across different viewpoints. Have you ever had a conversation where someone's wisdom or well-timed humor helped bridge a seemingly unbridgeable divide? As the hearing began that morning, few expected anything beyond the usual partisan positions. Education policy had long split along predictable lines, with conservatives emphasizing standards, discipline, and parental authority, while progressives focused on equity, increased funding, and broader support services. What no one anticipated was that this routine committee meeting would produce a moment of genuine human connection that would soon remind millions of Americans about what truly matters in our democracy. The committee room that morning was filled with the usual mix of elected officials, staff members, education policy experts, and media representatives. The hearing had begun with standard opening statements from committee leadership, followed by testimony from education officials and stakeholders representing various perspectives. When Representative Crockett's turn came to speak, she took an approach that immediately distinguished her remarks from the typical partisan framing. Rather than beginning with abstract policy positions, she shared 3 specific stories from schools in her district. One struggling with inadequate resources, another finding innovative ways to engage parents, and a third successfully implementing a community partnership program. The numbers and statistics matter, she noted, but behind every percentage point are real children with real futures at stake. She then skillfully connected these personal stories to research data showing correlations between educational approaches and outcomes. What caught the committee's attention, however, was how she addressed potential criticisms from across the aisle. Rather than dismissing conservative concerns about standards and accountability, she acknowledged their importance while offering a different perspective on how to achieve those shared goals. "I believe my colleagues across the aisle are absolutely right about something important," she said, surprising many in the room. "Standards and accountability matter tremendously. Where we might differ is in understanding all the factors that help children meet those standards. A hungry child can't focus on math. A teacher without adequate classroom resources can't deliver excellence no matter how high we set the bar." Then came the moment of humor that shifted the atmosphere in the room. Referring to her own educational journey, Crockett smiled and said, "Growing up, my mother held me to the highest standards imaginable, standards that would make some of our most stringent educational policies look like a day at the playground. And trust me, there was no appealing to another branch of government when she made her ruling." The laughter that rippled through the committee room wasn't just polite, it was genuine. Several Republican members nodded in recognition of a universal truth that transcended political division. The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly from confrontational to collaborative. As Crockett concluded her remarks, she offered a framework for thinking about education policy that acknowledged both progressive and conservative values. "Perhaps we can agree that we need both high expectations and comprehensive support, both clear standards and the resources to meet them, both accountability and understanding of the diverse challenges our students face." The committee chairman thanked her and then called on Senator Cruz for his questions and remarks. Cruz began by addressing the specific policy proposals before the committee, articulating his concerns about federal overreach and the importance of local control in education. He questioned whether some of the proposed programs would deliver results proportionate to their costs, and he emphasized the role of parents as the primary decision-makers in their children's education. But those present noticed something different in his approach. Rather than framing his questions as gotcha moments or using them to deliver rehearsed talking points, Cruz engaged substantively with the ideas Crockett had presented. He referenced specific examples from her testimony, acknowledging the real challenges she had identified, even as he offered different solutions. Representative Crockett's example of Lincoln Heights Elementary raises important questions about resource allocation, he noted at one point. "While we might differ on whether federal programs or local control best addresses those needs, I appreciate how she's brought concrete realities into what too often becomes an abstract policy debate." As the exchange continued, something remarkable happened. Instead of talking past each other with predetermined positions, Cruz and Crockett began an authentic dialogue about educational challenges and potential solutions. They identified several areas of genuine agreement: the importance of early literacy, the need for greater teacher support, and the value of community involvement in schools. Where they disagreed, they did so respectfully, clarifying their underlying values rather than attacking each other's motives. When Cruz expressed concerns about federal mandates limiting educational innovation, Crockett acknowledged the legitimacy of the concern while offering examples of flexible approaches that had worked in diverse districts. The committee members watched with growing interest as two representatives from opposite ends of the political spectrum demonstrated what productive democratic dialogue could look like, not by abandoning their principles, but by engaging those differences with mutual respect and a genuine search for common ground. As Cruz's time for questions neared its end, he posed a final query that moved beyond specific policies to something more fundamental. Representative Crockett, given your experience both as an attorney and now as a legislator, what do you think makes the difference between policy debates that divide us further and those that actually move us toward better solutions for the American people? It was a question that invited wisdom rather than talking points, and Crockett responded in kind. Crockett took a moment to consider the question. Understanding its significance went beyond the specific policies they had been discussing. The room grew quiet as she formulated her response. "That's perhaps the most important question we could be asking, Senator Cruz," she began thoughtfully. "In my experience, both in courtrooms and now in Congress, the difference often comes down to whether we're trying to win a debate or solve a problem." She continued, "When we're focused on winning, we look for weaknesses in the other side's position. When we're focused on solving, we look for strengths we can build upon. The first approach might feel satisfying in the moment, but the second is what actually improves people's lives." Cruz nodded, clearly engaged with her perspective. Crockett then added a touch of the humor that had earlier lightened the atmosphere. "And sometimes," she said with a warm smile, "it helps to remember that none of us has all the answers. My grandmother used to say that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. A reminder I try to remember, especially when I'm most certain I'm right." The laughter that followed wasn't divided along party lines. It was a shared moment of human recognition that transcended political differences. Cruz smiled genuinely. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. Mine had a similar saying, though with a Texas twist. Something about how the good Lord gave us all plenty of room between our ears, but not all of us use it for listening." This unexpected personal exchange changed something in the room. Committee members who had been checking phones or reviewing notes were now fully attentive. Staffers who had been preparing partisan response points set their laptops aside. Even journalists, typically focused on conflict and controversy, sensed they were witnessing something unusual and valuable. Cruz continued, his tone reflective rather than combative. "You know, Representative Crockett, Washington often incentivizes the wrong behaviors. The cable news clips, the fundraising emails, the social media algorithms, they all reward those who throw the sharpest elbows or make the most divisive statements." He removed his glasses again, a gesture that seemed to signal he was speaking personally rather than politically. "What rarely gets attention are the moments of actual problem solving, or the recognition that someone from across the aisle might have insights worth considering." Crockett nodded in agreement. "The incentives definitely push us toward performance rather than progress, but ultimately, we answer to our constituents, not to algorithms. And most Americans I meet, regardless of their political affiliation, are much more interested in seeing real problems solved than in watching political theater." Cruz then said something that would soon be shared millions of times across social media platforms. "Representative Crockett, before your remarks today, I had prepared a series of questions designed to highlight our policy differences. That's the standard playbook in these hearings. But your thoughtful presentation, the way you wove together both data and human stories, and especially your willingness to acknowledge legitimate concerns from different perspectives, that deserves more than a partisan response." He continued, "The wisdom you've demonstrated today isn't in claiming to have all the answers, but in showing how we might find better ones together. And your well-timed humor reminded us that behind our policy differences are human beings who probably have more in common than the political system typically allows us to acknowledge." The chairman, sensing the significance of this exchange, extended Cruz's time to allow the conversation to continue. Cruz posed a follow-up question that further deepened the dialogue. Given what you've said about solving problems rather than winning debates, what might that approach look like specifically for education policy? Where could those of us with different philosophical starting points find practical common ground? Crockett's response showed she had given this serious thought. I believe we start by acknowledging the legitimate core concerns on all sides. Conservatives are right to emphasize excellence, standards, and the crucial role of families. Progressives are right to focus on equity, adequate resources, and addressing barriers to learning, she continued. In practical terms, this could mean collaborating on literacy initiatives that both maintain high standards and provide targeted support for struggling learners. It could mean expanding school choice options while ensuring all schools, whether public, charter, or private, have the resources to succeed with diverse student populations. Cruz nodded, engaging with the substance of her suggestions, rather than looking for points to contest. That approach makes sense. It reminds me of legislation I worked on with Senator Bennett a few years ago on apprenticeship programs. We started with different priorities, but found substantial common ground once we focused on specific outcomes rather than ideological framing. As their extended exchange concluded, Cruz offered a final reflection that captured what many in the room were feeling. Our differences on policy are real and significant. They reflect genuine philosophical distinctions about the role of government, the nature of education, and how best to create opportunity. Those differences shouldn't be papered over or minimized. He paused, then continued. But your example today, Representative Crockett, your blend of wisdom, evidence, and that remarkable ability to use humor to illuminate rather than divide, reminds us that how we engage across those differences matters as much as the differences themselves. Thank you for that example. The committee chairman, visibly moved by the exchange, thanked both members for reminding us what public service should look like. Several other committee members from both parties nodded in agreement. As Cruz gathered his notes and Crockett prepared to yield her time, they exchanged a brief look of mutual respect that would soon be captured in photographs shared across the country. A simple human connection that transcended the political divides that too often define American public life. The impact of the Cruz-Crockett exchange extended far beyond that committee room, touching Americans in ways that surprised even veteran political observers. Within hours, video clips of their interaction began circulating online, not in the usual partisan echo chambers, but across diverse communities and viewpoints. What made the exchange so compelling wasn't that either had abandoned their principles or positions. Rather, it was their demonstration that strong convictions and deep respect could coexist, that democratic debate could be vigorous without being vicious. Comments on social media revealed how deeply this resonated with ordinary Americans. This is what I've been waiting to see in Washington. Why can't more of our leaders interact this way? Didn't change my policy views, but changed how I think about engaging with those who disagree. News programs that typically focused on political conflict found themselves analyzing what had made this exchange so different. One commentator observed, "In a political environment that rewards performative outrage, Cruz and Crockett chose a different path, substantive engagement with mutual respect, and the public response suggests Americans are hungry for more of this approach." The timing proved especially meaningful. Coming during a period of intense national division, when many Americans worried about the future of democratic institutions, the Cruz-Crockett moment offered a tangible reminder that a different kind of politics was still possible. A poll conducted the following week found that 83% of Americans across party lines viewed the exchange positively. More significantly, 67% said it made them more hopeful about the possibility of addressing national challenges despite deep political differences. For Cruz and Crockett themselves, the public response was both surprising and affirming. Cruz, in a radio interview days later, reflected, "That committee meeting reminded me why I entered public service in the first place. Not just to advocate for principles I believe in, but to engage in the challenging work of self-governance with fellow citizens who see things differently." Crockett, speaking to her constituents at a town hall, similarly noted the unexpected impact. The response to that exchange has been overwhelming, and it tells me something important. Americans are tired of division for division's sake. They want leaders who can be strong in their convictions while still recognizing the humanity and good faith of those with different views. The most immediate impact came in how ordinary citizens began approaching political differences in their own communities. A high school government teacher in Ohio described how showing the exchange to her students transformed classroom discussions. Students who used to just repeat partisan talking points started actually listening to each other. They're still passionate about their positions, but they're engaging with opposing views rather than dismissing them. Community organizations reported increased interest in civil dialogue programs. In a small town in Michigan, the local library began hosting monthly Common Ground conversations, where residents with different political views discussed community issues using the Cruz Crockett exchange as a model for respectful engagement. Social media platforms, often criticized for amplifying division, became vehicles for something more constructive, as the Cruz Crockett Challenge encouraged users to post examples of respectful conversations across differences. A video of lifelong political opponents from Iowa finding common ground on local environmental issues garnered millions of views. Educational institutions took note as well. Several universities incorporated the exchange into courses on democratic deliberation and civil discourse. A curriculum developer created materials for high schools titled Strong Convictions, Deep Respect, based on the interaction, helping students analyze how Cruz and Crockett maintained their principles while engaging constructively across differences. Neither Cruz nor Crockett changed their core political positions in the aftermath of their exchange. Cruz continued advocating for conservative approaches to education and other issues. Crockett remained a progressive voice for equity and expanded opportunity. What changed was how they engaged across those differences, both becoming more intentional about creating space for dialogue, even while maintaining clear positions. 6 months after the hearing, Cruz and Crockett were invited to co-host a forum on civil discourse at a major university. Despite their continuing policy disagreements, they shared the stage to discuss how Americans might rebuild a democratic culture based on robust but respectful debate. What Senator Cruz and I demonstrated wasn't actually revolutionary, Crockett told the audience. It was simply a return to fundamental democratic values that have always made American self-government work. The understanding that we can be adversaries without being enemies. That disagreement isn't the same as disrespect. Cruz nodded in agreement. Throughout American history, our greatest progress has come not when one side completely defeats the other, but when leaders with different perspectives find ways to move forward together despite real differences. That's the tradition we're trying to honor. The forum concluded with both leaders announcing the creation of the American Dialogue Project, an initiative designed to create structured opportunities for citizens with opposing viewpoints to engage in respectful exchange on critical issues. With support from philanthropic organizations across the political spectrum, the project launched programs in communities nationwide. In one small town in Pennsylvania, the local chapter brought together manufacturing workers and environmental advocates, groups that had been at odds for decades, to discuss economic development. As one participant observed, "We're not suddenly agreeing on everything, but we're finding areas where we can work together while still being true to our different perspectives." A year after their exchange, both Cruz and Crockett were featured in a national magazine article examining its continuing influence. Cruz reflected, "What still moves me is how that moment resonated with regular Americans, not Washington insiders, but everyday citizens who are tired of the constant combat and hungry for leaders who can be strong without being cruel." Crockett agreed. "The response showed me something powerful, that beneath all our political noise, there's a deeper American tradition of respectful engagement that people are eager to reclaim. Our differences matter, but how we navigate them matters even more." Perhaps the most telling indicator of impact came from an unexpected source. A National Debate Association created a new award named for both leaders, given not to teams that won the most debates, but to those who demonstrated exceptional respect for opponents while strongly advocating their positions. When informed of the award, both expressed being deeply moved. "That might be the greatest honor of my career," Cruz remarked, "because it recognizes what democracy actually requires, the ability to disagree vigorously while maintaining fundamental respect." Crockett concurred. "I can't think of a better legacy than inspiring young people to become strong advocates who still see the humanity in those they disagree with. That's how we'll rebuild trust in our democratic institutions." Everyday citizens continued finding meaning in their exchange. A retired teacher in Arizona described showing the video to her grandchildren. "I wanted them to see that strength doesn't mean cruelty, that standing firm in your beliefs doesn't require dismissing others. That's the America I grew up in, and the one I want them to help create." A factory worker in Ohio shared how the exchange had changed conversations in his workplace. "We've got every political view you can imagine on our line. After that video went viral, something shifted. We still debate politics on breaks, but there's more listening now, less attacking. We remember we're neighbors first, voters second." The story of Cruz and Crockett serves as a powerful reminder that even in divided times, wisdom, humor, and genuine respect can transcend political differences, not by ignoring those differences or pretending they don't matter, but by engaging them with the understanding that how we disagree is as important as what we disagree about. As we conclude this remarkable story, we invite you to like and subscribe for more content that celebrates moments of wisdom and respect in American public life. In a media landscape that often amplifies division, we're committed to highlighting examples of what's still possible when leaders choose a different path. America's challenges remain significant, and the political differences between various perspectives are real. But the Cruz-Crockett exchange reminds us that addressing those challenges doesn't require abandoning our principles. It requires engaging our differences with the wisdom, humor, and respect that democracy demands. In your own life, consider how you might apply the lessons from this powerful moment. How might you strongly advocate for what you believe while still honoring the humanity and intentions of those who see things differently? The future of our democracy may well depend on citizens willing to follow the example these two leaders set, standing firmly in their convictions while extending genuine respect across our deepest differences.